You should know this from the start. The first time I smelled human hair burning, I knew the farm had secrets that no one would admit to. I say it like that because confession is the only way I can sleep some nights, if I sleep at all. The farm was never the kind of place you pass on the highway. It sits off a gravel road that disappears into corn and then into a sound so thin it feels like a held breath. I grew up 2 towns over. I knew the fields by name, the old stone well, the crooked scarecrow the children used to shoot at with pea shooters. But I didn't know the kind of quiet that waits until dusk and then becomes a thing that watches. My job that summer was simple: mend fences, feed the hens, keep the tractor running. It was supposed to be honest work. The family who owned the place, an austere woman with hands like pliers and a man who hollered at the weather, kept to themselves. Their fields were beautiful in a way that made you look away. Wheat like folded paper, rows precise as prayers. The first night I stayed overnight because a storm had knocked the last bus from town. I heard the crows before I saw them. They came like a loose avalanche, wings stitched to the wind, filling the sky in black, landing with the arrogance of outsiders that know they belong. When dawn came, the first thing that broke me was a smell, sweet and wrong, like soap and something buried. The farmhouse was quiet. The family said nothing about the storm. They laughed sometimes, but their laughter had edges, like knives that had been sharpened and then left in the sun. It was Mrs. Harlow, thin-lipped, smelling of starch and cloves, who took me out beyond the corn to show me the beauty. She pointed with a needle hand, and I followed. At the edge of the field, where the fog sat low and the wheat bent like a bowed head, there were posts, scores of them, the way bones make a fence. On each post hung a figure, some wrapped in burlap, some in old coats, some with dresses that had once belonged to women who braided hair for Sunday. They were small at first, like effigies meant to ward off a single fox. Up close, you could see the way the fabric sat too heavy, the way shoulders slumped as if sleep would claim them and never let go. The crows sat and pecked, and their beaks made a theater on fabric and twine. I told myself then it was an art, something folk, something the old man did to keep the field safe. But the way the sky seemed to lean toward those figures, the way the air tasted of iron at the mouth, made me remember names. Missing kids posted in town, the quiet after a neighbor stopped showing up at church. I had a thought then. What if the things we hung to scare birds are not meant to frighten birds at all? Silence came first when I realized someone was moving below the burlap. When I pressed my fingers to the nearest sack, it moved like a breathing thing. The burlap smelled of iron and old starch. A crow hopped on the crossbeam and watched me with a patience that felt personal. Mrs. Harlow gave me twine and taught my hands to tie. Tight enough to hold, loose enough to keep them comfortable, she said, as if she were describing quilts. I tied because I did not want to ask questions, because the farm held a gravity that made the road out seem like an unkind joke. At dusk, the field changed. Lanterns swung low, and the crows arrived in a black tide. Neighbors stood in small knots, men who fixed roofs, a woman who sold pies, and they spoke in measured phrases. It keeps the crop, it's tradition. Their eyes slid off the posts, as if a glance might wake whatever lived beneath the fabric. I kept a list, tiny defenses, hair braided into knots, a locket with a child's face, buttons sewn into cloth like eyes. Once I found a shoelace tied the way my sister did her boots. Every object felt like evidence. Nights were worse. The field hummed with breath, the scrape of fabric against wood, and once, the sound of someone crying without sound. Names came like weather: Anna, Lucas, Ruth. I had seen them on missing posters. Their names had been muffled prayers in the store. The voices in burlap echoed those posters but offered no plea, only a low, repetitive cadence, like inventory. I tried to cut one free. My knife found the weave, and for an instant there was a face that looked at me through clouded eyes. The person inside mouthed something that could have been "thank you" or "leave," and then boots on gravel swallowed the moment. Mr. Harlow stood in the lantern light and smiled as men who keep accounts smile. They gave themselves, he said. They asked for shelter. There is a small arithmetic to this place: favors, shame, bolts of silence. The truck won't start at the edge of the field. The phone loses signal as if the air itself is complicit. Neighbors avert their eyes. The farm shows you the ledger, and waits for you to sign your name, and if you refuse, it finds a way to write it for you. I thought running would save me. I thought the road and the town and the familiar ache behind my ribs would be enough to outrun the field. Instead, when I tore across the wheat in the raw dark, the stalks smacked my shins like the palms of hands trying to stop me. The lanterns at the farmhouse burned a steady, accusing orange. The crows fell silent all at once, as if someone had cupped their beaks and told them to listen. I cut deep into the next sack because I had to see the face properly, to prove to myself that I had the right to untie someone, to be a merciless hero. The blade found skin, warm, faintly damp, and the smell that rose up was a sickening half-memory of shampoo and smoke. The eyes that met mine were not blank. They were patient and small and immediately, impossibly familiar, like a photograph of someone who had stood behind me in line at the store. She reached for me with a finger that trembled and smelled of wheat. Her lips moved, but the words were swallowed by the field. Men came then, not running, but with the slow inevitability of weather. Mr. Harlow's face was a map of ordinary cruelties, and Mrs. Harlow watched from the porch like someone who reads the end of a book before the rest. The neighbors that had been so careful to avert their gaze were there too, faces I passed every Sunday, eyes empty as jars. They did not shout, they made room, and the room became a sentence. I tried to lift her and carry her to the truck. Her weight tugged at me in a way I had never expected, as if the burlap held not only flesh but agreements and debts. The twine scraped my palms and left bruises that blossomed like secret maps. Someone whispered that the field paid for itself. Someone else said, quietly, that the weather had been kinder since they began the practice. I wanted to scream that kindness built on missing people was not kindness at all, but a soundless knot closed my throat. They told me I had chosen when I stayed that first night. They said the ledger was long and patience had its price. I have learned since that where they keep accounts, they do not need signatures. They just note who will be useful next, who has a voice thin enough to be drowned in wind. My struggle slowed. The world narrowed to the rasp of twine and the heavy, patient breathing of those hung like wind chimes. At dawn, the crows returned, pecked at knots with the familiarity of predators feeding from a known stock. Someone slid a strip of burlap over my head because the light was dishonest, and my face would not be kept from them otherwise. The field hummed. I felt the crosswood settle into my shoulders and the twine bite down into my wrists. Now, when the wind comes from the west and the sky presses low, people point at the posts and tell tourists an old story about keeping the crows away. They do not tell them how soft the breath was under the burlap, or how a man in overalls asked politely for help and left with the comfort of neighbors. The last thing I remember before the sack closed was my own voice, small and hollow, thinking maybe I had done the right thing. Now my hands are twine.
Subscribe to Horror Story Bar.